We're going to talk about a couple of other medical controversies this week: medical marijuana and vaccines. And these are topics that you've probably heard about both recently and probably for a long period of time. Now, medical marijuana is classified as a Schedule One drug, and it's under that schedule. It's considered a drug that has a high potential for abuse, and that's what Schedule One drugs are. It's the same classification as drugs like heroin, LSD, and ecstasy. And they've gone back and forth numerous times, the DEA, and looking at possibly reclassifying it as a Schedule 2 or Schedule 3 drug. But they keep going back to calling it a Schedule 1 drug. And if it were to go to a different classification, it might make it easier to use it for medicinal purposes, make it easier to conduct research into the effectiveness for various treatments and various diagnoses. But right now, and this was a recent vote, they decided to keep it as a Schedule 1 drug. So the U.S. government has actually sanctioned the growth of marijuana for testing purposes since 1968. They had several acres at the University of Mississippi, and every year they grow and test marijuana. So it's just kind of an interesting thing. In 1999, the Institute of Medicine report commissioned by the U.S. government recommended that marijuana be used as a treatment under certain conditions, and that it should be made medically available to some patients, because they found that there were studies that suggest that marijuana is helpful or could be helpful for some conditions, but they also said that there wasn't enough evidence to really know whether there is any long-term effects in terms of lung function, respiratory disease, etc. Sativex was developed and launched in Great Britain in 2010, and it was the first sanctioned medication that was derived from marijuana, and that is a mouth spray, and it was approved to treat spasticity in patients with multiple sclerosis. So it was just interesting. In 2010 in Great Britain, it was the first drug derived from marijuana that was sanctioned. So marijuana has been legalized in many states. It's being considered in others. If when you go onto that ProCon website, you'll see where different states stand in terms of the approval of medical marijuana. So it is sanctioned by several states, but it's not approved by the Food and Drug Administration as a medical treatment. And that non-approval makes it difficult to do research, but it's also it's kind of a vicious circle, because they state that the lack of research is the reason that it's not approved as a medical treatment, and then it makes it challenging for the medical treatment to be done. So it's hard to do the research if you can't classify it. So it's like this vicious circle that keeps going around. Researchers who are able to conduct testing on marijuana need a special license to be able to study it, and that's because of the Schedule 1 classification. So although I said recently they had a vote and the DEA decided to keep it as a Schedule 1, what they did during those conversations was to agree to support additional research. So they made it a little bit easier for researchers to be able to conduct research, but it still can be a little bit challenging. There were 2 man-made drugs that were approved by the FDA, and the specific approval is to treat nausea and vomiting related to chemotherapy. And those are synthetic marijuana that have been approved with the derivatives of the cannabinoid medicines. So medical marijuana uses plants, the plant and or the chemicals, the cannabinoids, to treat diseases and conditions. There are more than 100 different chemicals or cannabinoids in marijuana, and it's used currently to treat many conditions. So there's been some research done, although again it's not copious research that's been done. So it has been used to treat Alzheimer's, cancer, glaucoma, MS, nausea, etc. Um, so limited research in general for those areas. More research in the use of marijuana for pain, nausea, and vomiting, specifically related to chemotherapy. So there's quite a bit of research in terms of using it, particularly to aid in reducing nausea and vomiting for patients who have undergone chemotherapy, and use of particularly the spray in treatment for spasticity in multiple sclerosis. Now, one of the emerging areas, and you're going to watch a couple of videos related to the use of marijuana to treat treat seizure disorders in children. And there's a lot of anecdotal information. If you do any kind of Google search, or even if you talk to parents that have children who have severe seizure disorders and they've tried marijuana, lots of anecdotal information that it has been effective in helping reduce their children's seizure activity. And you're going to watch one video. Particularly, Dravet syndrome is a condition, a genetic condition that has severe seizure activity. So there are a lot of things involved with Dravet syndrome, but one of the things is severe seizures. And these kids can have hundreds of seizures a day. And so parents have tried, out of desperation because there's nothing else that they can do. They've tried marijuana for their children and have anecdotally demonstrated some improvement. And one, in the video that you're going to watch, one little girl inspired the development of a particular strain of marijuana called Charlotte's Web that was named for this little girl. And you'll see her video, or her in one of the videos that you're going to watch. So to get a prescription, you need to have a written recommendation or prescription from a licensed doctor, and that doctor has to be in a state where it's legal, and you have to get it in a state where it's legal. And you have to have what's considered a qualifying condition. And that's where some of the gray area comes in, because it's the state that determines what is a qualifying condition. Some states require a person to also get a medical marijuana ID card, and that's particularly important if you are going to have it on your person. And you still have to follow the state rules in terms of how much you're allowed to carry. There are a variety of ways to take medical marijuana. For some people, it's smoked or inhaled. That has generally a faster effect on the body than it does if you take it in the other way. So eating products that are often they're baked or cooked in some way, the spray and the topical, so there can be ointments or creams. Those have a much longer time to be able to have any effect. So you can get an effect from smoked or inhaled, easily within 15 minutes, but then it can be an hour and a half before it's ingested or sprayed or applied topically to have any impact. So there are side effects that are associated with marijuana: bloodshot eyes, depression, dizziness, rapid heartbeat, sometimes hallucinations, low blood pressure, decreased judgment, decreased coordination. They found that in teens or adolescents that take it, there is some impaired mental function and developmental delays that can happen in teens. It does affect the brain. Unfortunately, not a lot of long-term research that's been done in this area, but they have shown that brain development is affected, particularly if they take a good amount of it. But when you're talking about someone who's having seizures, you have to weigh the risks or the side effects versus what's going to happen if the seizure activity continues, or the nausea or the pain. So, it's about quality of life and development and some of the other side effects that could be affected. Limited evidence on the impact on lungs. Again, they don't know. There's some research that indicates that it appears to have the same impact on lungs as regular tobacco, but then you have other research that says that it doesn't. So hasn't been studied long enough to really have a good answer on that yet. So why do we have this controversy? Well, the controversy exists because it can be addictive, and many people consider marijuana a gateway drug to higher level um, drugs that have much more of a significant impact um, on life. So, is it a path to take something stronger? Another concern is that there's no oversight currently by the FDA. So it's the states that monitor and regulate this drug. So, there's no quality control. So there can be the strength of the drug can be different in different states depending on where it's grown and processed, etc. So that can be an issue. And then, one of the topics that you hear a lot is what people are concerned about is that, the impaired driving and things like that. It's much harder to test. When, if a person is drunk driving, you can pull them over and you can do a breathalyzer test and you can determine on the spot, is this person impaired? Whereas with marijuana, it's much more difficult to be able to make that determination. So I'm going to end here and we'll do vaccines separately.